Router 2, and we'll keep the story going. So, FSW13, welcome to today's class. We're going to be talking about React Router, continue talking about React Router in this lesson. And we're basically going to take what we learned yesterday and learn a few more things today. And we're going to continue building out this, our Marvel Avenger application here that we started yesterday. The project for today is going to be React Router Movies. And if you finish that, then your stretch assignment today is React Router Apple Nav stretch assignment, which it simply is just recreating the apple.com navigation bar up here. And it's a nested navigation bar. So when you click on the different items in this nav bar, we want to see the different items come up in the secondary navigation bar. And you can get a little bit creative on how you choose the icons. It's all up to you. There might even be somewhere online that has SVGs of different Apple products. I've seen that passed around before, so you can look into finding those. But yeah, this is a really fun one. So if you get done with today's assignment, then move on to that and just have as much fun as you can with that. It's really cool. Awesome. So I was getting ready for today's lesson and had a chance to look over some of the collection of Marvel movies since 2008. So it's been 10 years, and I was just kind of blown away by like how cool this collection is. And I was just thinking that technology-wise, this is such a cool time to be alive, that we have a company that is creating something as cool as this. Also, you know, technology-wise, the business world is exploding with tech companies, and the need for what we're learning through this class is just so high right now that it makes programs like Lambda School so successful. So yeah, I just wanted to share that with you today, that it's a really cool time to be a part of this class. And somehow looking at this list of Avenger movies led me to that line of thought. But hopefully the connection makes sense a little bit. Anyways, super excited for the next Avengers to come out. That's going to be amazing. Okay, with that side note, let's take a look at the last objective from React Router 1, which is creating dynamic routes using URL parameters and the match object. So if you started on the movies project yesterday, then this is a big part of that project. So hopefully if you got into that, into the movies project, you started learning about dynamic routes already. But we'll go over it and we'll cover it and we'll talk about what URL parameters are, what the match object is, and how we can use those in our application. So let's go to the docs here, and let's see if we can find /:. Okay. Let's see, let's go find one down here at the bottom. All right, so this is kind of what we're talking about when we say dynamic routes using URL parameters. So a URL parameter is something is this part right here of our URL. So if we've got this path, before this, of course, would be, if this was in the URL, before this first slash would be the base URL, and then we'd have the continuation of the URL, and then we get to this dynamic piece right here. So this is similar to, if we're using backticks, interpolated strings, this is similar to something like the $ curly braces, where this becomes a dynamic variable that, depending on what you've clicked on, will take you to, maybe this is ID number 1. So we would click on, we'd be in a list of invoices, we'd click on the first one, and it would take us to /invoices/1. And then we go back to the dashboard of invoices, and we click on the second one, and we would go to /invoices/2. So this part of the URL string becomes dynamic, where we can change this depending on which invoice we've clicked on from the dashboard. And then when we get to our new component, when we're routed to /invoices/some number, we're going to pull up an invoice component, and we're going to find that invoice that has the correct ID, and we're going to display that invoice. So if we click on the third invoice, we're going to go to /invoices/3, and then inside this component, we're going to find the invoice with the ID of 3, and we'll display that invoice instead of the first one or the second one or the fifth one. So this is really cool. This really opens up and expands what we can do with React Router inside our code. So let's take a look at it with this. The first thing we want to do is make an actual Avengers or Avenger file. So let me share this with you guys, and you can fork off of this, or if you still have yours up, let's work on this together. Over, Mickey and friends. You must not have seen my shirt today. I don't know if you can still see me. Mickey and friends. What's up? Don't worry, they're all Disney. It's okay. They can all be friends. Okay, so take one more quick second to get this loaded into your code sandbox. And when you do that, in your components folder, we're going to create a new file called Avenger. And I'm just going to copy and paste what's in home into Avenger and just replace the name. Like that. That didn't work. There we go. Okay, take a second to get caught up. Then I'll show you, so you won't have to be working on your part of the project for a minute. I'll show you what we want to do to route to this component, and then I'll let you guys go in and build it. So again, get to this point, we've got a new file in our components folder called Avenger, and we just have a basic component built out, functional component built out for this file. Okay, so once we have this, we're going to go into our index.js, and we're going to create a new route. Don't worry about typing along. If you don't need to type along with me if you don't want to. Just watch and I'll explain as we do this, and then I'll give you a chance to catch up with where I'm at. Okay, so we're going to create a new route. It's going to be at the path. We're going to kind of piggyback off of this path right here. So we're going to say, and that this is very normal, as we saw in the docs, that you have /invoices and then you use kind of the same path /invoices/ID. So this is a very normal pattern. So we'll go /Avengers /:ID. It's important to remember the colon because that's what tells React Router that this is a dynamic URL. This is a parameter, a URL parameter that can be whatever we tell it to be. All right, so the component for this is going to be our Avenger component, which we need to now import. And then, of course, close off the route there. Okay, so we now have a new route, which means if we go to Avengers /some string, like we'll say Avenger at ID 3, aha, we get our Avenger component. But what's wrong? Now we have our Avenger list still, but we just want to see our Avenger component. How do we change it up so that we only see our Avenger component here and not our Avenger list? What do we need to change on this page? Exact. Perfect. Okay, where are we adding exact to? Which route do we need to give the exact attribute? Perfect. So on our Avengers. So on this one, on our Avengers list path, we need to do exact here. Now, when we go to /3, there we go. So we can go to our list. We can go to any number for our ID. This could even be just some foobar string or voobar, and it still gets us there. So all that React Router is looking for is some string behind /Avengers. It doesn't have to be a number. It can just be any random string. So let's take a look at what is happening when we are at this URL right here. So in our React tools, we open it up, we remember browser router, we remember router that has this match object. Our links are here. Here's our two routes that are not displaying anything. So our home and our Avengers. And then here's our route that is displaying, and it's displaying the Avenger component. Now, if we look at route, this component right here, we see that we have the match object on state. We've got the path that tells us we're at a dynamic path with the :ID. So we've added a parameter to our URL, and we've got the props that we're passing down to it, or the component prop that we're passing down to it. So we've got, on this route, we're passing two props, path and component, and they're right here, path and component. But it has this cool new thing that we're going to learn about today, which is called the match object. Now, this is in the state of the route, but we want to have access to our match object from inside our component itself. So inside our component, we don't have access to this route component. We only have access to our component itself. So we want to, how do we get the match object here? So let's take a look. If we click on our Avenger component, you'll notice something really cool has happened. React Router has taken the match object from the state of this component and has passed it as a prop down to our Avenger component. So to answer this question, how do we get the match object here? Well, let's do this. We're going to pass in props. We're going to console log props. My zoom tools are in the way. Move, zoom. Okay, so here it is. Here's our props object, and we have props.match. So let's console log props.match, because we don't know what it is yet. So let's take a look at what props.match even is. Okay, so props.match gives us our path that we're on. It gives us the URL, so the actual URL. It gives us if it's an exact match. And then it gives us this params object. So you can see that params is an object with an ID of VUBAR right here. So let's look at props.match.params. Okay, so props.match.params is an object with an ID of VUBAR. Let's go to /3 instead. Oh, that's pulling up from here. That's interesting. Get rid of that one and refresh. Okay, there we go. So in here, we're at /3. So now our props.match.params is this object which says ID number 3. So where's the prop and where's the value coming from? The value, pretty easy to see, the value is coming from the actual URL itself. So what we typed in up here is going to be put in right here. So if we type in Iron Man and go to it, then that's the value of our props.match.params.id. What does this .id come from? This comes from in our index.js. When we created our dynamic path, it comes from this right here. So if we change this to foobar ID, now we have foobar ID. If we change it back to ID, now we have ID. If we change it to Avenger ID, now we have Avenger ID. So in our match object, we've got a params object with the whatever we put right here after the colon, and then whatever we type in up here in our URL as the value. Okay, any questions on this map object? We'll look at it quite a bit more, so don't worry about that, but any questions right now? Okay, this is a good question, which we'll look at in a few minutes, Michelle, so we'll come back to this. Yes. This is good. This is where we're getting to. Patrick is ahead of us here. Okay, any questions with the match object? The match object is important and can kind of throw us off a little bit because it's hard to really conceptualize where these are all coming from. Okay, so here's our props.match. We've got a few things up here which are sometimes good, sometimes we need these, but the most important part is this params, props.match.params dot whatever we put as our dynamic param right here. Yes. Yep, that is exactly right. So let's see. The ID is coming from the params. Yep, and this is the param. This is what's called a dynamic param right here. So again, if we change this back to just ID, we'll see that params changes to ID. And then if we go back to Avenger ID, we see that params dot, it's now dot Avenger ID. Okay, so one way that can help us clear this up is let's console log props. And let's import, first we need, this is a dependency. We can add a dependency, prop types. We're going to import prop types from prop types. Okay, so let's look at our params. So we've got match, location, history. And our match is prop types dot an object, right? We'll just pass an empty object for now. Location is prop types dot, I think they're all objects. So we'll just do this. If they're not, we'll change it, but we need to look at it in order to see what it is. Okay. So I'm going to leave this right here, and I want you guys to build out this component and add this new route to your index.js, build out this component, and be able to go to some string out here, so use some dynamic string. I'm going to just put 4 and pull up the Avenger component. And then also build out your prop types. So I'll give you about 8 minutes to do that. And everything is saved. So if you need to, oh, thank you guys. If you need to see my code, just look on Slack. Grab the sandbox right there. Here we go. equals Avengers list, because I'm pulling my Avengers list from my Avengers data, dot find. So it's going to loop through Avengers list. It's going to find an Avenger. And I'm going to return the Avenger whose ID is equal to props dot match dot params dot, we can look back at our index to see what this last one is, dot Avenger ID. And we're going to be able to retrieve our correct Avenger. But there's one little gotcha here. Actually, not in this one. But I will tell you about the little gotcha in just a second. So let's do this. Let's console.log Avenger. And then we'll look at exactly what I did and how this is working. Woo, a lot of stuff. Good. Okay, so here is our Avenger. We clicked on Captain America, and now inside my Avenger component, I have Captain America, and I can start building out a profile page with my Avenger. If I go back to the Avenger list and click on Black Panther, there we go. Now I have Black Panther. Okay, so what is the magic that's making this happen? What's the glue for all of this? Props.match.params is how this is all working. We know that props.match.params gives us, let's pull this a little bit higher. So props.match.params gives us the ID of the Avenger we clicked on. So we can take that ID and we can loop over our Avengers list and find the correct ID or find the correct Avenger based on our props.match.params.Avenger ID. Okay, let me look up here. Thank you, Tom. Okay, nobody wanted to share your prop types. That's okay. We'll do it real fast. So match. One thing that's cool about prop types that I'll teach you real quick is even though React Router gives us these other three properties, we're not going to use them in our component. So I don't need to list these in my prop types here. I'm only going to use params, which is of the prop type object. And then I know that my params is going to have an Avenger ID because that's what I defined right here on the route. Okay. This is always a string, and this leads me to the one gotcha that we have to be careful of when we're using props.match.params.dynamic string here. I'm going to say that a whole bunch because I want you guys to drill this into your mind. Props.match.params, props.match.params, props.match.params. We can see it spelled out in our prop types right here. Props.match.params. Okay, the param that comes through is getting pulled off of this URL string. So this is always going to be a string, even if you type in a number. It is a string of the number 8 right now. What would happen if in our data we change all of our IDs to be numbers, which is very common that you'll have a number for an ID instead of a string? Well, let's look here. We get undefined when we try to log our Avenger, right? So we're at the Avenger 8, but we didn't actually find an Avenger from this right here. That's because we're comparing a number to a string. So if you ever have data where you're trying to, if you're ever trying to compare a number to a string, you just simply have to change one of them to the other one. So two ways I could do this. This one's the number. I can change this to a string by doing this, right? This changes it to a string. And now we have our Avenger console logging. Or we can do, this one's a string, we can change this to a number. Either way is going to be fine. However you want to do that, you just have to compare apples to apples. You can't compare a number to a string and expect to find your Avenger from this list. So that's a potential gotcha that I want to make you guys aware of. And in fact, I'm going to change all of these real quick. I don't know why my scroll's not working. Just so we can keep that as an example in this project. Bear with me one moment as we stare at Iron Man's head. Almost there, more than halfway done. Doing good. So tedious. And last one. Whew. Okay. Here we go. So now we're comparing a number to a number. And when we click on an Avenger, we'll get the correct number out there. Okay, so I'm going to take a second to build out a profile page now. We don't want to just display this. We want to actually do something useful with our component. So I need to find where I left my example app. Here we go. I'm going to do a little bit of copying and pasting. And I'm going to teach you guys another cool trick today. Whew, okay, there's a lot of stuff there. And we want everything that's named character to be named Avenger. Not that one. All right, so another trick that I want to teach you is, remember how we are not allowed to return multiple elements in our JSX out of the same, that are on the same level. We have to have a wrapper element, right? And we usually do like div with the class wrapper or class container or something like that. I'm going to teach you a trick to show you how you don't necessarily need to do a div, because some people don't like just having divs nested in divs all over the place. So what I want to teach you is, if we import this component from React called fragment. Fragment basically gives us an empty URL or empty HTML element without like adding an extra div or adding just some erroneous element out here. So if we just wrap everything inside this fragment, then we now have the stuff we need wrapped inside a single element here. I've got to figure out what is going on with my syntax, and then we can look at what this does to our underlying code. Unexpected token. So this is probably good. While I look at what's going on here, this is probably a good point for a break. So we'll take a quick 5-minute break. I'll figure out what's going on with my code, and we'll come back and talk about look at fragment. Oh, it's probably that right there. Okay, good. So I'll talk about, we'll look at fragment after our break, and then we'll go into the rest of our lesson. Okay. So before we started the break, a lot happened. I copied and pasted a lot of code. I took out some of that, and we're left with this code here, and we've wrapped this in a fragment. So let's take a look at what a fragment is. Oh, I've got it up here. Woohoo, so there's number 8, Black Panther. So if we look at our elements, we've got our app, and we've got our home and Avengers there. And then you'll notice that we just have on the same level here, we've got our image and we've got our character info wrapper div. So we don't see any sign of our fragment. We don't see any sign of any kind of wrapper div. In my opinion, this keeps the using fragment that doesn't show up in the HTML in the browser, keeps everything a lot cleaner. So instead of wrapping this in a div, like we might want to do, and then we have this wrapper div that just pushes everything down one more nested level of divs, in my opinion, keeps it a lot cleaner. We can look at it in the React tools. In our Avenger, and it doesn't even show up in our React tools here. So pretty cool little component that React just pushed out, I don't know, 6 months ago. This is a brand new thing, so pretty awesome. I suggest if you find yourself wanting to do just a wrapper element just because, that maybe something like this will work better for you. Okay, so let's take a look at what we have accomplished so far today. We built out a new route that has a dynamic URL parameter that we've named Avenger ID. Then in our, and when we're at this route, we're going to display or render the component Avenger. So when our component mounts and is rendering to the screen, we're going to look through our Avenger list data to find the Avenger that matches that param that gets passed right here. And we're going to use that Avenger to build out our profile page. So no matter which Avenger we click on, we get their profile page displayed to us because of our props.match.params.AvengerID. I can't stress enough how important props.match is. And it's a little bit like props, right? Where it's kind of hard in your mind to conceptualize where this data is coming from. What is .Avengers ID? What is the value for this that will match a value for this? So as you're going through your project, if this is not clear, then I would suggest going into React Router 1 and kind of going through this objective and follow through along here. Maybe look up some, do some Googling on it to see how else you can learn that. And then if you can't clear it up in your mind, message me and I'll jump on with you and we'll walk through it one step at a time. But this needs to be something that we understand hopefully pretty well. Okay, let's see. Oh, sorry, I didn't see you, Michelle. Hopefully you're back. Okay, yep, everybody's telling me fragments missing. How to pass props on the route itself. We're going to get into that in just a few minutes. Jumping ahead. Okay, cool. Yep, that would be really cool. And we'll get there. You're about 2 steps ahead of us. Yep, check out the recording. Michelle, hopefully you're back. I'm sorry I didn't see. Oh, haha, back. Good. Yay. All right. So let's move on. Props.match.params. Super important. Please take the time that you need to make sure that you're understanding where all of this info is coming from. Okay, so as Brian mentioned, we have now imported our data in 2 places. We have it here in Avenger, we have it here in Avengers list, but this is not following what we've learned so far, right? And how to organize applications. So we've got functional or presentational, 2 presentational components in Avengers list and Avenger that are in charge of their own data. And we don't want that. That is not how we've learned to organize our applications. Where do we want to manage the data for these 2 components? Where would be a better place to do that? Whoop, whoop. Yep, index.js, which is our app component. Okay, so in our index.js, we are going to import. We're going to remove it from both of these. We're going to import our data into index.js. Avengers list, okay. We're just going to call it Avengers data. All right, cool. So we would, up to this point, we would just take this Avengers data and we would set it on state normally, but we're not going to worry about that for right now just because of time's sake. So we would take this data and pass it down to our Avengers list and then to our Avenger component because we need those, right? But at this point, we can't really see a way to do that. Like normally we would do something like Avengers list prop Avengers equals Avengers data. right? That's how we would normally do this. But we can't because we're passing our Avenger to our component prop here on the route. Now, if only there was a prop that we could pass to route that would let us render a component like this and be able to pass down our props. So what do you guys think? Render for the win. Component cannot set props, but the render component, or the render prop, can. So this is exactly right. We're not going to, for these two, we're not going to do component. Okay, let's see. So we're in, we just need to go up one level, I think. Yep, there we go. So let's take a look at the render component for our route. So we're going to go here. We're going to click on route, and we're going to find the render methods. So there are three ways to render something with a route. The first way we learned about yesterday was with component, right here. Route, use path, and component, and it will simply render our user component when we're at this route. That's what we've done so far. But this isn't going to work for our current situation. So let's take a look at route render. Okay, so render, we already know from the documentation that render is a function. So let's get to that point. We're going to do render, and we're going to pass it a function. Okay, good. I'm going to drop this down so it's a little bit easier to see. Okay, so we have a render prop. We're passing it a function. Let's go look. Let's see. Instead of having a new React element created for you, let's see. So let's just look over here in the code part. So here is the render prop. It's passing in a function, and that function is taking in props. Okay, so let's add props right here. All right, this is an arrow function with one argument. So I'm going to take away the parentheses, but we still have our function. So we have a function that's taking in props, and it looks like it's returning a component. So this is with wrapping for animation. So let's look at this one. Render function, and it returns some JSX, which could also be a component like it is down here. So let's do it. Let's move this whole thing up here. So our render prop is now, our render prop takes in a function, and it returns our component like this. And we're passing down into our component. Let's take this Avengers part away. So right now we're just displaying the list of Avengers, or the Avenger list component. And our goal is to take the data that we have here, that we've imported, and pass it down to this as a prop. So we're going to pass down Avenger, let's call it Avengers list prop is Avenger data that we've imported. Is it Avengers data? Yes. Okay, so this is just syntax that we're going to have to get used to inside our render prop. We're just going to have to get used to this function here. So now that we have render instead of component, and we're passing down our data on this Avengers list prop, we can go into Avengers list and we can say props. We're going to import prop types from prop types, and we're going to say Avenger list dot prop types and then on our props we are passing down Avengers list. Right now we'll just say array. So we've got an array of Avengers. So instead of Avengers list, which we had before imported, we're just now going to do props.Avengers list. And now we've got the same data in our Avengers list component. And we have it available to us because instead of doing component, we are now using the render prop. If we go just to our list, we can see that we still have our list of Avengers rendering here. Whoa, aren't you guys so glad you learned about HOCs? They're all over the place, and you just have to look for them. Okay, any questions with this? So today, our intro to React Router yesterday was pretty lightweight. Today, we're really seeing the meat of React Router. And it's going to be a little bit tougher. Learning about the match object is a lot. Learning about the render prop is a lot. But these are really important things for us to understand as we start to build out more and more complex applications like this. Okay, the last thing we need to do is when we click on a character, we don't have Avengers list anymore, right? So we need to do the same thing for our Avenger component. So I want you guys to get caught up with me, or just fork this sandbox again, or however you want to get up to this point where you are at the same level as me, maybe copying and pasting. Be careful with copying and pasting though, because it could lead to worse problems. But anyways, I want you to use the render prop on this route to pass down the Avengers list to this component. And you'll see in a minute that doing it following this way is going to break it, and we're going to have to do one more thing here. But just get it to this point that it's similar to what's going on here, and then we'll talk about the next step we need to take. So hopefully you were able to refactor this route to have a render prop like this instead of the component prop like this. Michelle asked earlier why we're doing this instead of why we want the render prop instead of the component prop. The reason is we decided that we didn't want our Avengers list to import data and be managing its own data. And the same thing was happening in Avenger. They were both importing our Avengers data list, and they were kind of in charge of their own data. And that's not what we've learned about creating React applications. What we've learned is we want a presentational app, which would be our components, which would be Avengers list and Avenger, to receive data through props and only be in charge of looking what's on props and displaying data from what's given to them on props. And we want our container components, usually they're class components. We haven't had time to refactor this as a class and add Avengers data to state. That's okay because we know how to do that, and for sake of time, we've just kept it like this. So we want our container component to be in charge of retrieving data and managing data, managing the state for this component tree. And then we take that data and we pass it down to our components, to the props of our components. But there's a problem when we use component. We can't pass props to Avenger. We can't pass data to Avenger through its props. So we have to use this render prop instead, which gives us the ability to now pass props down like this. So we're going to do that here because our Avenger component needs that list, that same list of Avengers, right? Because we're looping through this Avengers list to find our Avenger. So let's do that, but instead of Avengers list, we're going to do Avenger. Now there's one problem with this. Let's look at our Avenger now let's look at our Avenger. And we see that we're already using props for our match object, right? We're already using props.match.params.AvengerID. So what happens when I click on, if I go to my list and I click on an Avenger, we get this error. Oh, we didn't save. We need to, our Avenger list is now on props, right? Okay, so now we have that. So let's go back and we'll click on Thor. Ooh, and now we get this error. We can't read property params of undefined. So what this is telling us is match is undefined. We can't read props, or we can't read property params of an undefined object. So we no longer, through this method, we no longer have props.match. Let's look at this. Let's console log our props. And we'll go to the console. And we'll clear our console. And we'll refresh the page. Okay, so here's our props. All we have on props now is Avenger list when we were expecting this match object as well. So right now we just have Avengers list, prop types, array. This is bad practice, and I know you guys in your homework will not do this. You'll do array of, and you'll spell out, you'll define the entire shape of what we're looking at here. So we want match, we need a vendors list, and we need match. So there's a trick we can do. Let's go into here and let's, instead of rendering this, let's do console.log the props. Aha, here we go. There's our match object that we want. Okay, so how do we put this together? We've got a render component that's a function that's being passed the props that we want. But when we do this, we're not actually passing those props into our component. So we're going to do a little trick. First, I'm going to show you in our console log. Remember, we had match. So we're looking for match. And where's match coming from? It comes from this props object. So we're going to do props.match. So now we're passing down that match object that we want. So let's take a look here. There we go. Now, if we go down and look at our props, here's our props object. We have a vendors list and our match. Bum, bum, bum. Okay, so we've solved that problem. The couple of other props that are on here are the location. And we never know when we want to use these. Right now, we're not using these, right? But it's good practice to pass all of them down. The other one was history. It's good practice to pass all of them down. Unfortunately, this is really verbose and kind of ugly, especially since we're doing match equals props.match, location equals props.location, history equals props.history. So the shorthand for this, so we don't have to do this, but we can still get all of these passed down to our Avenger component, is to simply spread in our props object here. So if I do this, it is essentially doing all of this right here. So just this simple little spread operator right here is doing all of this, and I can delete that. I'll leave a little note here for you guys so you know what that's doing. Okay, so the spreading in our props is the same as doing match equals props.match, location equals props.location, and history equals props.history. So this is all we have to do to get our match object back to us. Now if we look at our app, let's clear this, we'll refresh the page. We're console logging our props, right? There we go. Now we've got all the same props that we had before with history, location, match, and this static context thing, and our Avengers list. So we get everything we had before plus our Avengers list just by doing this right here. This part's important because remember, in our Avenger component, we need our props.match object. So we need to spread in our props. If you forget this, you won't have access to all these other things here. Whew, okay, let's check this out. Yes, Michelle, props, spreading in props will get all of those that we were missing out on before. Nice, good job, Vera. Props of thunder. Okay, cool. Let's do the next thing. We're learning so much today. So far, we have learned how to create a dynamic route using URL parameters in the match object. We haven't added nested routes yet. So we need to learn about nested routes and use history and just explain the difference between link and nav link. And I don't know why we don't have the render, we don't have an objective for the render prop. We should have an objective here for using the render prop. Okay, so let's talk about using the built-in history object and the link and nav link. So the built-in history object is pretty cool. That's what this is right here, history. We're going to use this in our Avengers list. The way we're going to use this is it's kind of ugly and not good code to wrap a link around this because we know it's going to wrap an anchor tag around this header. And this probably isn't the best form, right? This isn't what we want our HTML to look like. So instead, we're going to use the history object to get us to our Avenger page. So I'm going to get rid of our link here. We're going to bring H3 back up to that same level. We don't need link anymore from inside our Avenger list. On this H3, we're going to do an on-click. And our on-click is going to use our props.history object. And we're simply going to do props.history.push to that URL that we wanted to. So instead of wrapping this H3 in a link, we're going to have an on-click function that uses props.history.push. The one problem with this is if we look at our prop types, we're not getting the history or the match object into this component. So we want history, which is going to be shape, and in that shape we're going to have push, which is going to be prop types.func. So we need this function, but we're not yet passing down history. So how do we pass history down to our Avengers list? What are we going to do? Yeah. Good job, Lauren. So in the render, yep. So we're going to spread in props. I would say that probably 99.9% of the time that you do this pattern, you're going to spread in props here. So just get used to spreading in our props. And now we have our props.history available to us right here. Okay, so then we just need to pass in the same thing we did before. So we're going to do /Avengers / and then the ID of our Avenger. And then when we're at our list, it's still going to take us to the correct place. Vision, we haven't looked at his yet. Okay. So there's basically, we've learned of two options for how we can navigate inside our app, right? Up here, we've got our links, so we can go home, we can go to Avengers. Down here, we're using onClick to push us to a new URL. And this one's cool because it's a dynamic URL depending on which Avenger we click on. There's one more way that we're going to learn to create or to navigate this, and that is with link and navlink. So we learned about link, let's talk about navlink. And we just did this. So we use the built-in history object to navigate to other routes. So now we're going to talk about navlink, and then we'll jump into nested routes. Navlink is pretty cool because it lets us do some cool styling for our navigation bar. So give me just 1 second. All right. So in here, instead of bringing in link, we're going to import navlink. I want to make sure there's no questions on props. Good. What? Okay, so now we're going to import navlink instead of link, and let's change both of these to navlink. And let's see what change that did for us. So if we look at our HTML here, and we look inside inside our little nav bar here, we want to, you can see that it's adding a new class for us called active. So let's do this. We're going to look at the docs for navlink, and we're going to see what it gives us and how we can do some cool stuff with it. Navlink. It's not in here. Let's see. Okay, that's okay. I can explain this here. So we're going to, navlink takes a couple extra props. We need to have our to prop because we still need to be able to navigate to the right places, right? But we're also going to add an active class name prop. We're going to call this active class name active nav button. So now let's take a look at our app. There we go. So we've got active nav button has been added to our A tags. And the default, remember last time we looked at it, it was just active, right? So that's the default. If you don't specify an active class name, it will default just to active. But we have kind of a problem here. So we want to, well, give me 1 second. I'm going to kind of rearrange my HTML. Into how my CSS, my pre-made CSS is expecting this to come in. Okay, and I need to give the class name on my UL. Oh, not there. UL. Ah, cool. Okay, so with my predefined CSS, I created this navbar for our project. So you'll notice both are blue here, but when I click on home, one goes white. So let's look at this in the elements. And right now, only one class has received the active nav button class. Only one anchor tag has received this class. But when I click on Avengers, then both of them have the class added to it. And that's because the same problem that we have with our routes down below, where if I didn't add this exact prop here, we would render the home component everywhere because it's going to match this in a regex statement. So this is going to be cool. We're going to do the exact same here. We expect this to be an exact match. And now, wherever I click, I have our cool CSS happening up here. So you can watch this in the two different A tags right now. The home tag has the active nav button. Now it's gone off the home tag and it's on the Avengers tag. Woohoo! So what does navlink do that link cannot? Navlink gives us this active class name. Remember, it defaults to just active. So you don't have to have this here if you just call it active. In our CSS, we call this active nav button. So when we are at these URLs, and React Router knows we're at these URLs and it can do this, when we're at the correct URL, it will add this class name to this anchor tag. And then we can do some CSS, active nav button to change. So here's our default navbar styles with the blue text and no background color. When we have active nav button, we change the background and we change the font color. So we can do some cool CSS stuff off of nav links. Any questions with nav links? I just made this project earlier, so it's in my project here. Feel free to steal my CSS. I give you permission. Okay, we've got 13 minutes and we've got one more thing to cover. I know we're kind of flying through this, so hopefully it makes our easy day yesterday seem a little bit, well, today will be a little bit tougher because we're covering a lot. So enjoy your easy day yesterday because today it's going to be a little bit harder. A couple people typing, I'll come back to you guys. Okay, so let's look at what we have accomplished. Whew. So we've changed these, our nav bar, from our links to nav links so that we can style them differently depending on what our URL is. Then we changed this link to just an on-click to use our history, props.history.push function to take us to this page. And then on this page, we learned how to create a dynamic route using URL params. And in order to get the correct Avenger for this page, we are looking at our props.match.params.Avenger ID and finding the correct Avenger to build this profile page here. But we need to do one more thing. We need to learn about these nested routes. I'm going to jump to here. Yeah, remember we took the poll yesterday to see if we wanted to push forward and learn that last objective. This didn't come into play in our project yesterday, so we decided to just rehash everything here, which moved this objective to this day. And that's okay. Once you go through the movies project, a lot of this will start to cement in your mind. Good question. You can, I think most people create a separate file for all this routing stuff. So yeah, I don't think it is best practice. I think it'd be better to have like a routes file in your app somewhere. So really good question. Okay, guys, let's do this last piece here. So when we go to our Avenger component, I've changed our data a little bit to give us movies, a movies array for each Avenger. So we're going to look at this here. So let's go to our Avenger, and we're going to pull this part out. Let's see, we're going to pull the description out, and we're going to create nested routes right here in our Avenger. So we need to import our route from React router DOM. Now, nested routes, we have to remember that in order to understand nested routes, we have to remember that this right here, these routes that we've defined, we're defining routes, and that's kind of how we talk about it, but we have to remember that this is just a component. And components, we know how to deal with. We can take components, we can put them anywhere inside our application, right? So in our Avenger application, or in our Avenger component, we're going to define two routes. We know that route takes a path and a component. Or if we needed to pass data down, we could do render here. So our path for this, we're going to say /Avengers. We're going to piggyback off of this route right here. We're going to say /Avengers /Avenger ID. We need to keep that the exact same. And then we're going to say /info. And then we're going to pass in a Avenger info component here. And then we're going to create a second path for movies. We're going to pass in an Avenger movie component here. Okay, so this is pretty quick and easy to set up. We need Avenger info.js. And we need Avenger movies.js. So I'm going to use our home component again and make our Avenger info. And this is simply going to return, we're going to take in props, and this is going to return, let's see, what did we do before? H4, or a p tag with Avenger dot description. So all this, the only thing that this component is going to do is display props.avenger.description. So we're expecting something to be passed to props, right? So we need to come in here and change this to our render instead of to our component. We don't need the props from here. So we're just going to do pass down Avenger is going to equal our Avenger here. Now we need to import that component. So I'll finish this up real quick, and then we'll talk about what is happening, because there's a lot going on with this, and so just stick it out with me. Follow along as I complete this this part of our section here. Okay, so let's look at this and let's try and reason about what's happening here. So I took out, we had this p tag inside our Avenger, right? Like this. But we took that out and we put that in its own component. And we want to, and we're saying that when we're at Avenger/ID/info, we want to render that p tag here. But if we route to Avengers/ID/movies, we would rather render probably a list of movies, right? So we're going to pass this. We're going to say Avenger movies and import that. So this is really cool because now we're back to kind of composing our app with small pieces of UI with small components. And this is all depending on where on our URL, where we're at in our URL. Let's see. There we go. So when we go to this path, we want to see, say we click on Black Panther, we want to see the info, the description of Black Panther. When we go to this path, we want to see the movies that Black Panther is in. So we're going to build out our, oh, that's not what we wanted. We need to build out our movies component. And we know we're getting our Avenger passed to us in props right here. So we're going to create a list of the movies. And this needs to be props.avenger. Okay, we've seen this before. We know how this works. We're mapping over a movies array inside one of our Avengers. And we are for every movie that's on that Avenger object, we're creating an LI and just displaying that movie title. So what does this get us in our application? Let's see. Oh, didn't mean to exit that. So could not find dependency. Oh, somehow we added that as a dependency. // that's why we do // for our own files. Okay, so what does this get us here? We took out the description that we had before, right? But we want to see that description, so we're going to go to /info, and there is our description. If we're at /movies, there's our list of movies. Whoop. So this is what's called nested routes. In other words, this section that's nested inside our Avenger component has its own route set up and will display something different based on what's here. So let's change this up real quick. When we go to, in our Avengers list, when we click on an Avenger, we don't want to just go to the Avengers /ID. We want to go to info. So we need to make sure that we've created these two nested routes. We want to actually display one of them right here. So if we go back to our Avengers list and click on Captain America, now we see his info. We're at /3/info. But we also want to see a list of movies, have a way to see our list of movies. So we could easily do that in our Avenger component by creating a sub route, a sub nav right here. We're going to import link. And actually, I'll build this as a link, and I want you guys to, if you play around with this later, one thing you could practice doing is making this a nav link and styling it better than what we're going to see here. So this link is going to go to, it needs to be an interpolated string, /Avengers /:ID, Avenger ID /info. And this one is going to take us to /movies. Oh, sorry. When we do backticks, we need to wrap everything in curly braces. Okay, so we've created a little nav bar inside our Avenger component that will take us back and forth between info and movies. Oh, now we need to figure out what this problem is. Aha. Oh yeah. So the whole purpose of doing the backticks interpolated string is so that we could make this dynamic, which we did not do. But we'll make it dynamic based on which Avenger we're in. There we go. Try that one more time. Okay, so we're at /info. We click on movies. Now we're at /movies. And we get the list of movies. And back and forth. Movies, info, movies, info. Okay, everything, most of the things that we did at the end here, we've seen before, right? We've seen that we can, how to make routes. Today we learned about using the render prop instead of component so that we can pass in our Avenger as a prop to our Avenger info. So we get the correct description. We've learned about links. We understand what they do. And they're going to take us to these different links here. So all of this stuff we went through quick, but they're all things that we have learned about and seen up to this point. It's just being able to take those things that we've learned and apply them in a different context, like down here for our nested components, or nested routes. One last gotcha, and then we'll look at our homework for today. Actually, let me jump in here and see. Yeah, this stuff is really cool. So Patrick, yes, I told you that most of the time you'll need to, if you don't pass in props, it doesn't matter. But I did tell you that most of the time we want to do this, so I'll just make sure to spread in our props. I think this is good practice. Just get used to spreading in props, because you don't know who's going to want to come into Avenger info later down the road and use the history or the match object. You know, so somebody may want to come in and do that. So thank you. Okay, the last gotcha, then we'll look at our homework. The last gotcha is this. So we've got these two nested routes here, right? We've got Avengers/ID/info, Avengers/ID/movies. So here we've got Avengers/ID. If we put exact on this route, then our Avenger component is only going to render when we are exactly at this route. So if we go to somewhere like /info in our URL, our Avenger component is no longer going to render, which means we won't even get these sub routes, these nested routes rendered, right? Because this whole component is not going to render. And if this whole component does not render, then it's not going to come down here and render /info. So let's take a look at that. We've added exact to this path. So now when we come into /info, we get nothing, because it doesn't match, this path doesn't match /info exactly, and we're not rendering our Avenger component. So if you get to a point that you've built it all out and you get to this and you say, okay, why are we not rendering here? We can even look at our React tools and we can see the route listed there, but it's not rendering anything. Right? It's listed here, but it's not rendering. So if you get to that point and you see that happening, then take a look at what you have exact on, and remember you have to be extremely careful putting exact onto a route because of this exact situation. So I told you yesterday that you have to really think about which components need exact, and it's really important to put them on the ones that need it, and it's really important to leave them off the ones that it needs to be left off of. Once we take that exact off, then this still works. Okay. Yeah, this is a really good uh, way to think about it. If you're using nested routes, you probably don't want exact on this. Okay, that was a lot today. Don't uh, don't get too stressed over it because the um, you'll walk through it one step at a time in the homework, and it will definitely come to you. This shouldn't be too bad for you. If you have questions, if you are stuck on something, you know the channels to use to get help with this. So don't stress about it. This is all something that we can do. All right, so the homework, React Router movies. We are talking about React using link and navlink, passing route parameters, and passing props rendered by the router. So this will be our render prop, passing those props there. So follow these instructions very closely. You're going to fork the repository, clone it. Then you have 2 servers that you'll be running. So make sure you read the instructions carefully. In the root, run yarn install to download dependencies, then run yarn start. Then in a separate terminal, cd into the client folder and run yarn install and run yarn start. The reason for this is in the root of this project, we've built a little server for you that's going to serve up a list of movies. Okay, so this is going to be a live server that you're firing up on your computer that will serve a list of movies to your component or to your application. So then when you cd into client, this is the root of your React app. So you've got another package.json, you've got source. This is all stuff that we recognize and feel better with here. So don't worry too much about this first stuff here, unless you want to start looking into node servers. It's kind of fun to jump in there. But follow these instructions exactly, and you should have your app up and running with the server up and running as well. Okay, so part 1, stuff we did yesterday, wrap your app with the router, define 2 routes. So you want one route at slash, you want one route at slash movies with the :ID afterward. Then, so the first route, the home route, is just going to be a movie list component. And then the second route is you want to be able to click on a movie from the movie list and route to that movie like this with the dynamic ID. Part 2, make it so the card and movie list is a link and link to the ID of your movie when you click on it. Follow the instructions again, guys. This is one step at a time, and I feel confident that you guys will be able to understand it as you go one step at a time. Modify line 13 in order to accept the correct ID for the movie selected. Add the functionality so that the home button on the saved list component navigates back to home. And then now you should be able to navigate back and forth between individual movies and the home screen. Okay, so stretch goals. If you've completed parts 1 and 2, feel free to move on to these stretch goals. Refactor, a couple things to make it dry. Add a save movie functionality. And then turn on your saved movie list into links. And then turn your saved movie links into nav links. So if you get through all of these stretch goals, we've got another really fun stretch assignment, which is the Apple Nav stretch assignment. So what this is basically the apple.com. Oh, I think we talked about this at the beginning. Apple.com website, build out this nav bar, and then you'll have this nested nav bar right here, depending on where you're at, what you've clicked on. Okay, that is it for today. Whew. Take a deep breath, go have fun, make sure you take a good lunch, and take this project one step at a time. And I think you guys will, there's enough in the code sandbox that we're building today for you to get through this project pretty easily as you just go one step at a time. So you guys are awesome. Let us know how we can help you, and we'll see you tomorrow.